Hey everyone, thanks for coming back to Build at Home. I am your host, Ricky Camilleri, coming to you from my home in Bushwick, Brooklyn. I'm joined right now by the director, writer, producer of the documentary Bedlam, as well as I think the author of the book Bedlam, Dr. Kenneth Rosenberg, an incredibly important work that everybody should look out for, that everybody should watch, especially given this moment right now. Before we get into what Bedlam is about, I want to say, as we do at the top of all these interviews, that at the moment, upwards of 574 million school meals have gone missing for children across the country due to the school closures because of the coronavirus. If you are interested in helping these children get fed, please go to nokidhungry.org where you can find out how you can do that. Dr. Rosenberg, thank you so much for being here and again for making this work. I know it's something that is incredibly personal for you and that you've been working on for a number of years outside of living it for your whole life.
Yeah.
Talk to me about how it started and how you settled on the format and these subjects and how these subjects themselves would illuminate all of the different aspects of mental health within mental health problems in the country right now.
Right. Well, thanks for having me, Ricky. I mean, in the 1990s, I made 4 films for HBO and 2 or 3 for PBS. And I took a break, really focusing on my practice. But then around 2010, 2011, I thought, I really wanted to go back to filmmaking. I wanted to do what I thought would be just about the most important thing I could do with my life. My kids were launched. My patients are doing fine. My practice is good. But I thought I really wanted to make a film again, but a film about something that really mattered, and a film about the seriously mentally ill, people who have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, suicidal depression. And I thought hard about where to make that film, and I thought it should be at the epicenter of the crisis, which is in Los Angeles.
Mm.
So I went to Los Angeles, started filming in the jail. The jail was, unfortunately, the LA jail was and probably still is the biggest mental institution in the country. As you know, the jails are now the de facto asylums because we've deinstitutionalized or really rather trans-institutionalized people, taking them from the terrible asylums to the worst streets and the worst jails. So I started filming. Yeah, go ahead,
Can I just
please.
say, like, we use the term deinstitutionalization, but the fact is that we didn't
We
deinstitutionalize anybody. We actually
trans-institutionalized.
moved them into a different institution that is
Yes, in the worst way.
inappropriate for their problems.
Unquestionably, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's why, I'm fond of using the word
Yes.
institutionalized, because we didn't take them out of anything, we put them in something worse. So I started filming in the jails, and I thought that really, I wasn't really getting the real story because people weren't in crisis then. So I decided to film in the busiest emergency room in the country, which is USC, University of Southern California County Hospital, LA County Hospital. And there I saw the stories emerge where people were really in crisis, as we see in the film. But I realized then also I wasn't telling enough of the story because you were getting glimpses of madness, but you weren't really getting the real trajectory of folks. And you weren't seeing what they were like at home with their families, with their loved ones, at work, if they had work, on the streets, if they lived on the streets. And so I decided to make the film, I really need to follow people for years and years. And then
Mm.
I started doing that. Also, ethically, it was kind of a good idea because, we had HIPAA consent forms to film everyone with their consent, their doctor's consent, first and foremost. But I thought to really have people involved in the film, we should not just film them, we should collaborate with them. We should film them over the course of 4 or 5 years. And every year say to them and their family members, do you want to be in it? Are you sure? And moreover, help me tell your story. Help me know where to go and where to follow you. And that's how the film emerged. Now, the last piece of the film was putting myself in it. I had no intention, Ricky, of doing that. No intention whatsoever. I lived many decades without sharing my story about my sister's serious mental illness with most people. A few of my friends knew, but I decided at some point I really need to overcome my own shame, my own stigma, and really share the story about my own family, which, as you know from watching the film, is a hard story. I mean, not a story of, it's a story of love, but it's not a story of success. It's a story of denial and of shame and of stigma. And I decided that, to really help the viewer understand what was in this film and what was behind this film, you needed to not just know me as a psychiatrist or a filmmaker, but you needed to know about what led me to become a psychiatrist and what led me in some ways to become a filmmaker. And that's the story of my sister and her bout with schizophrenia.
Your sister lost her life because of her bout with schizophrenia at the age of 52, and you talk about that in the documentary. And there is so much shame wrapped up in how we talk about mental illness. And I think often some of that shame comes from the way we talk about someone who succumbs to mental illness, in the sense that we say took their life or lost
Right.
the battle of some kind, when the fact of the matter is, and I'm wondering if you feel this way, your sister was 52 and had lived for some time with this, and in a lot of ways is a brave survivor because of, I mean, how detrimental her illness actually was and how much she was able to survive.
Right. I think you're right, Ricky. I think she was a brave survivor, and she was definitely a survivor. But as you know from watching the film, there are some bad things that happened to her on
Yeah,
the way.
of course.
And I think that these are bad illnesses to have, but they're very, very treatable. They're manageable, as you see from the film. People do survive and even thrive despite their illness. So I think you're absolutely right. I think she lived bravely, and I mean, now we're all struggling with the COVID crisis, and we have some glimmer of what it's like to live with the kind of adversity that people with serious mental illness live with every day. In terms of loneliness and isolation and depression and anxiety, and you magnify that by through the lens of psychosis and suicide, and you really get a sense of what that must be like for people. But I think, Ricky, your point is well taken. She was as much a survivor as anything, and I loved her and love her still to this day. As I say in the film and as I say in my book, I wish I could have helped her more. And I
Mm.
think it speaks volumes about our broken system that I, a psychiatrist, and I think a fairly good one, if I may say so, was really unable to save my sister.
You say our broken system, and you have a emergency room doctor who works with mentally ill patients, who at one point in the film essentially defines insanity by the way in which we treat the
Right.
mentally ill in this country. As we've seen COVID break, the pandemic just sort of strike through this entire country and limit our hospitals and really show what their limits are and what they can handle. Do you think that outside of feeling the sensations of anxiety and loneliness, isolation, we're also feeling all around within all different aspects of the hospitals what those who take care of the mentally ill in hospitals feel on a daily basis? We're now seeing it play out in all different aspects.
Yeah, I think we are. I think we're really able to understand and empathize with them. And I think we're also realizing that, as Governor Newsom said in California, we're all one part of the big body. We're all
Mhm.
one. And we can't expect to take care of people with serious mental illness if we don't really give them housing, and if we don't give them medication, and if we don't provide research and proper resources. But at the same time, we can't expect to even, get a handle on this crisis. We all talk about flattening the curve and sheltering in place. Well, how could people do that when they're psychotic and living on the streets? You're 10 times more likely to be in a jail than a hospital if you have a serious mental illness. And you're much more likely, if you're on the streets, to have it be a person with serious mental illness. A third of people on the streets are there mainly because of their mental illness. So I think that, we're getting some sense of that. I think there are many silver linings, if you will, from this
Mm.
COVID crisis. I think one is that we realize, we're all in it together. If one part of our society, or for that matter, one part of our world is sick, we all become sick. I think we're also realizing that we need universal health care. That, we can't really, yeah, you got it, man. I mean, we need prevention, we need early intervention. We treat people with serious mental illness when they're at the equivalent of stage 4 cancer. We
Mhm.
need to treat them when they're stage 0, when they're stage 1. Again, these aren't easy illnesses to have, but they're very, very, very treatable. Not, of course, if treat someone at the very end of their illness, or for
Right,
that matter, like 50% of people with illness, they don't get treatment whatsoever.
right.
Now, that can't be okay, right? And if we had a universal health care system that took care of everyone's needs, and realize that we're all in it together. And if you get sick, I have to, suffer because I have to pay for your illness. So I really want you, Ricky, to be well, whatever your illness. That's, I think, one of the lessons we're learning right now.
This isn't a question, but and I'll get back to the questions in a second. But
Okay.
every doctor that I know that works in emergency rooms or has worked in emergency rooms is an advocate of some form of universal health care. And it's always shocking and surprising to me when people aren't. When you just say, talk to the people who have to treat the sick, they will tell you this is what is necessary and what we need in the country.
Yes.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. It's apparent. And also when you see really sick people, because as I said earlier, when you treat people earlier in their disease, you have a much better chance of helping them. And when you try to prevent the disease, there's that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's true.
Mhm.
We now could even see with the COVID crisis, it's much easier to prevent it than to try to get someone off of a ventilator and to wait, at that stage. Well, with serious mental illness, we're dealing with the ventilator stage. We're not
Yeah.
dealing with the social distancing stage or the prevention stage or the take precautions stage.
In the documentary, you talk about in the Reagan era, basically the systematic destruction of mental hospitals across the country, which would
Yep.
basically house those who were unfunctional. And I believe that there were a lot of problems with those hospitals over the course or over the years that they were in existence. One, because of how little we knew about treating the mentally ill, and also just because their function, I don't think they were looked out for. People were properly cared for as much as we would have hoped for. But I wonder how much of that is myth versus how much of that is myth and how much of that was used as actual, I don't want to say propaganda, but as
Mm.
talking points to justify the dismantling of these institutions.
That's a great question. I mean, I wish we could answer that properly. I think, we have pictures of those places. My film is
Hmm.
called Bedlam, but Life magazine had a wonderful article in 1946 that talked about Byberry Hospital, a hospital in Philadelphia. And it said Bedlam 1946. And you look at those pictures and you see films like Titicut Follies, and you know
Yeah.
that, these were really wretched places. And I think it's just I think they needed to be replaced, but demolished? No. I mean, I think it's like, they were the only game in town. We do need big institutions, to jump ahead about what we're trying to fight for. One of the things we like to do is find something called an IMD exclusion. So there's this law in the books. Forgive me if I get a little wonky for a second, but
No,
there's this
please
law in the
do.
books that says, the federal government will not pay for a psychiatric facility that has more than 16 beds, 16 beds, right? And there's exclusions for that, and people try to get exclusions, but that's the law. Now, contrast that to Twin Towers Hospital in Los Angeles. They have 1,500 beds, and they were trying to build a jail, Twin Towers Jail, I should say, trying to build a jail with 3,800 psychiatric beds. So you could put 4,000 people in a jail who have serious mental illness, but you can't put 17 of them in a hospital. So those are some of the archaic laws that need to be changed.
Is there any sense that if we are housing the mentally ill more in jails, not if we are, that jails themselves, we could better equip them to handle them? They would have a separate wing. They would have a more
Yeah,
compassionate staff. They would have
yeah.
more therapists, more counselors on staff versus, the mentally ill just sort of interacting with guards and then once a week meeting with a therapist of some kind.
Well, Ricky, I think an argument can be made that the jails should be better equipped. But I would argue that the jails should divert people with mental illness who are
Hmm.
primarily there because of their mental illness, divert them into treatment. And there are, ways to do that. There's something called mental health courts, in which you go in front of a judge, and the judge tries to get you out of treatment, out of jail, and into treatment. Now, you saw that in the film with one of the people you follow, Monty. But unfortunately, the judge could say you belong in treatment and not jail, but there aren't that many treatments available. So in the case and point in the film, it took the guy 3 to 4 months to find, a bed that would accept him. So I would say yes, the jails could be better. Jails could always be better.
Sure.
Incarceration could always be more humane. But I mean, it's comical, right? Because do people, and tragic at the same time, do people with serious mental illness really belong incarcerated in the first place? I mean, should it really be a crime to have a serious mental illness? Because that's what it amounts to. They commit petty crimes. They don't show up to probation. They, you know, don't show up to court. They get more violations. Before you know it, it's like way high. And they become criminalized too. They, you know, they're on the streets. We know about 80% of people who live on the streets use illicit drugs because they're just available and you have to get by.
Yeah, they're
Um,
living on the streets.
so it's like, you know, you got to get people pull them out of that cycle. Uh, you have to pull them out of that cycle because it's humane, Ricky. But you have to
Yeah.
pull them out of the cycle because it costs us a lot of money. It's super expensive to put someone in jail. It's super expensive to treat them at stage 4. It's super expensive to treat someone in an emergency room. So we could, you know, save a lot of money and, of course, save a lot of lives.
Is there a question as to where that money goes now versus where it went to prior to the dismantling of the institutions and where the
Yeah.
political will falls because of that?
It's a very complicated and interesting question because, you know, originally the states would take care of it.
Hmm.
And then the federal government stepped in and said, no, we'll take care of it. We'll take away the asylums and we'll provide community mental health centers. And those outpatient clinics, you know, weren't so great. And then by the 1980s, President Reagan defunded them.
Mm.
So then President Reagan said, well, let's give this back to the states. Let the states deal with it. But the states didn't want it.
Let's
They
get out
didn't
of
want
here.
anything to do with it. So there's this real sort of ping pong. I think at the end of the day, you know, I'm not an economist or a sociologist. I'm just a psychiatrist who makes films and is a family member. But I think at the end of the day, the federal government really needs to step in and do the right thing. So that IMD exclusion thing we were talking about just a moment ago, that 16-bed thing, that's a federal thing that needs to change. And you can't have it be state by state. It really should come, you know, we're not going to say the state's going to decide that we don't treat cancer until stage 4. No, the feds would say that's insane. And, you know, no pun intended, we need to intervene.
You know, you interview Governor, then Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom in the documentary. What have you found after having finished the documentary and him having become governor? Have you seen any sort of big strides on his part to sort of to make progress with one homelessness, and two, the handling of the mentally ill in the state?
Yes, actually really have. I mean, he's really been an advocate. He's been true to his word. I think that I mean, I don't have any political ties to him or any
Sure,
affiliation,
yeah.
but I'll tell you honestly, I was really impressed. He was among the first governors to respond, you know, intelligently to the COVID crisis. And I
Hmm.
think that, you know, telling people closing businesses down, creating social distancing, and he actually helped provide shelter for people who are homeless in general and people with mental illness specifically. Because I think he realized that, you know, it's a humanitarian issue, but it's also an economic issue. And if we're going to flatten the curve, we really need to take care of these folks. So I really have seen him put his words, you know, they talked about to me when he was in jail into action as a governor.
Have you seen anything on the federal level from this current administration in regards to mental health awareness, mental illness, and treating it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this administration actually is taking a stand and a positive stance towards that. You know, we have a SAMHSA, which is a government agency that provides federal funding for programs, has been very proactive in addressing serious mental illness, not, you know, not the worried well, not, you know, people who have anxiety disorders or panic attacks, but people who are very, very sick. And I think they have been doing things, you know, in the COVID crisis, they've relaxed standards for teletherapy so that I could see my patients through teletherapy and Medicare or Medicaid could pay for that. So I think that the administration is wising up to that too, frankly. But I think that it's not something, you know, we talk about Governor Newsom or President Trump. I don't think it's something we could look to these guys to solve, frankly. I think the way to solve this is with us. You know, that's what changed every other illness. It wasn't, you know, that a president declared a war on cancer. It was that we decided that we were going to stand up for cancer or HIV. And that really changed the paradigm for all other illnesses. You know, if you have cancer now because of those people who stood up, or if you have HIV now, you're on a protocol that's 3 or 4 or 5 years old. A new protocol, a well-researched protocol, and they're always developing new medicines. If you have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, you're on the kind of drug that's 70 years old. And that's because we don't have the advocacy. So I think it's good that we have a good governor. I think it's good that the administration is paying attention to this. But the only way it's really going to change is if we, the citizens, take measures and we say, this is not right. We're not going to stand for this. We're not going to let our loved ones die in the streets and the jails.
And this may be too in the weeds or too specific, but it's so important to note that when someone is struggling with something like bipolar or schizophrenia and the drugs that they're taking could be 70 years old, as you said, that those drugs, they may work for a short period of time and then wear off, and they may relapse, or they may work for a long period of time and then wear off in some way, and that person may relapse. There's so many unknowns that I think people have when it comes to treating the mentally ill in this country.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think that we need, above all else, as a psychiatrist, as a physician, I feel like we need research. This is not, yes, we need community mental health centers. Yes, we need more hospital beds. We have 2 or 3% of the hospital beds we had in 1950 per capita. Mental illness has not exactly gone away. We need all that, but I think we need more than a brick and mortar solution.
Wait, can you say that again? We have 2 or 3% of the hospital beds per capita?
Yes, that we had in 1950 for psychiatric patients.
Wow.
Pretty messed up, isn't it?
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. Yeah. And sorry, now you can finish what you were trying to
say. I mean, it was a tangent, but it was, yeah, you're right. It's a very, very important and impressive and tragic factoid. But I think we need more. We need research. We need to, at the end of the day, the problem is not who treats the folks with serious mental illness. The problem isn't that the buildings they're in or the care that they get. I mean, yes, that could all be better. But at the end of the day, the problem really is the diseases. So as a physician, I believe, we really need to explore scientific, evidence-based treatments that will move the ball forward. We had the decade of the brain in the 90s, but that has not yet translated into anything that's really been game-changing for people with serious mental illness.
One of the subjects of the documentary, his sister ends up becoming one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I thought, one, what a stroke of luck for you as a documentary filmmaker, but also two, how important it was to be able to now show the cross section of mental health justice and racial justice and as well as poverty as well. Now all these things kind of get to come together with her creating that movement and that voice. Was that something that you were even thinking about when you were approaching the documentary, or was her sudden founding of that movement, did that open a door for you as well?
Well, when you're making a documentary, you always look for kindred spirits. And I do think I found that in Patrice. She was a sibling, as I am, of someone who has serious mental illness, and she took it very seriously. But I had no idea that she would become one of the foremost activists in the world on serious mental illness. When I met her, the only reason I met her is because, as I was saying earlier at the top of the interview, when I film a patient, I always say, it's great that your doctor consented, it's great that you consented, but I need to talk to your family, make sure they're cool with it. And also I know this is a family illness, so I want to talk to them about, how they deal with it, how they help you, how they struggle with it, what it all means to them. And that's how I got introduced to Patrice through, filming her brother. And she told me at the time that she was an activist. I was like, great, I hope something comes of it, but we'll follow you regardless. And, it was clear from the beginning, you see in those beginning interviews, how brilliant and kind of wonderful and warm she is. But I had no idea that she would co-found Black Lives Matter, which is largely founded for people like her brother.
Yeah.
Because if you're a person with serious mental illness, you have a 25 or to 50% chance of being involved in a police shooting. Let me say it another way. Of police shootings, 25 to 50% of people fatally killed by the police are folks with serious mental illness. So, she was concerned about her brother being a black man, a large black man, who people would falsely assume is a threat, and someone who has a mental illness and who was diagnosed in jail. I mean, he was sent to prison basically for having a mental illness. And she co-founded Black Lives Matter based on that premise. She also has become, the person who really stopped the mental health jail that was being built for several billion dollars in Los Angeles, and recently had a referendum passed in Los Angeles County to really focus on mental illness and try to decarcerate people, particularly those with mental illness. I had no idea that would happen. You're right, it was great luck. But I think that's the kind of beauty and organicity of being a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker. You get to follow the process, you kind of surrender to it. And if you're in it long enough, you find something that really tells the story. And I think Patrice and Monty do tell the story very, very well.
You yourself are a doctor, and you are following people. Your subjects themselves are struggling with illness. Do you even oftentimes documentary filmmakers like to talk about objectivity and remaining objective and remaining at a distance from their subjects, but it seems to me like that's kind of off the table immediately for you as the filmmaker. You're filming as well as there to help, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I make it very clear that I am there as a filmmaker, not as a doctor.
Right.
And especially in the beginning, I have to make that clear because I don't want anyone to confuse my job as a filmmaker with my job as a doctor. In fact, in the hospital, I didn't even introduce myself to the patients for months because if they were filmed, I wanted them to just see a camera person, not see a doctor. But having said that, I'm very much in my subjects' lives. I'm always calling them and talking to them about their medication, trying to provide them with, outlets for care. I can't. It's just an ethical violation. You're not supposed to treat your friends or family members. I can't treat them because now they're my friends and in a way, my family members and subjects in my film. But I'm very involved in all their lives. And for me, that's just so wonderful, frankly, because I get to hang out with them and help them.
Yeah, there's a wonderful moment. It's not, I mean, it's tragic in a way, but there's something heartwarming about the moment where you drive one of your subjects to the hospital because she's in crisis and you can tell and she can tell and she wants help and there's only one place that she feels comfortable getting that help. And you don't call an ambulance and document her having to get taken away in an ambulance or anything.
Right.
You put her in your car and you talk to her and you drive her there, which I thought was such a compassionate way of being a filmmaker and a doctor at the same time.
Yeah, well, that was credit is due there to Joan Churchill and Alan Barker. They were the camera team there, and actually, I spoke to her that day. I was in New York, as you know, I live in New York City, wow. And I was often in Los Angeles, but I couldn't be there every moment. And I spoke to Johanna that day, and she said, I need to go to the hospital. And I asked Alan and Joan to go over there and take her, and she loved them, and they loved her, so that was an easy ask. So truth be told, I was not in the car. I was on the phone, though, the whole time.
Good. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Dr. Rosenberg, I am so happy that you made this film that it's going to be available for people to see. I think, as we've said, it's incredibly important, as well as the book Bedlam, which I'm imagining people can buy right now.
Yes, it's on sale. The Penguin Random House has made it available for the online version for $1.99. So if you buy that, I'll get 2 pennies, but at least you'll read my book. So that would be a mitzvah for me.
That's the important part, that the book is read. And the documentary, Bedlam, when can people see it? How can people see it?
It's on PBS's Independent Lens, 10 p.m. Eastern. And I wish I knew. Maybe you could provide more of the times. I'm not great at the PR. Sorry, Ricky.
It's gonna be on PBS, which I'd imagine it means
it's this Monday night, Independent Lens, on the 13th of April.
And then if you're like me and you've got the PBS app, I'm assuming it'll soon be available via the PBS app on the Independent Lens show. Yeah.
It's streaming for at least 2 weeks, maybe a month.
Fantastic. Dr. Rosenberg, it's been an honor to talk to you. Thank you so much for the great work that you do. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay self-isolated.
I don't know about the latter, but thank you so much. And thank you for the great work that you do, Ricky.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rosenberg. Take care.
Bye. Bye.